Bryson DeChambeau just did something so shocking, so controversial, that PGA Tour players are absolutely losing their minds behind closed doors. And we're not talking about some minor rules dispute or a bad shot that went viral. This is way bigger, way more personal, and way more damaging to relationships that were already hanging by a thread. What did Bryson actually do that has the entire PGA Tour ready to explode? Why are players who used to call him a friend now refusing to even acknowledge him in locker rooms? And how did one decision turn Bryson from a polarizing figure into someone that PGA Tour players genuinely can't stand to be around? The answers reveal a side of professional golf that nobody talks about publicly, but everyone feels intensely behind the scenes. Let's rewind to understand how we got here, because Bryson DeChambeau's relationship with the PGA Tour and its players has always been complicated, tense, and filled with drama from the moment he turned professional. In 2016, Bryson was different, not just in his approach to the game, but in his entire persona. He came onto tour as a physics major from SMU who treated golf like a science experiment rather than an art form. Single-length irons that defied conventional wisdom, an obsessive focus on speed training, and bulking up his body to generate insane power. A methodical, painfully slow approach to every shot that drove playing partners and fans absolutely crazy. But here's the thing, Bryson's methods worked, and that made him impossible to ignore or dismiss. He won the 2020 US Open at Winged Foot by completely overpowering one of golf's most difficult courses. He averaged over 320 yards off the tee and made the tournament look easy when nobody else could break par. He proved that his unconventional approach wasn't just gimmicky, it was revolutionary. And that success, combined with his unique personality, made him one of golf's biggest stars and most talked about figures. But success and popularity with fans didn't translate to popularity in the locker room. From the very beginning, Bryson rubbed fellow PGA Tour players the wrong way. There was the slow play issue that became so notorious that other players openly complained about it in interviews. Brooks Koepka famously rolled his eyes during a 2019 interview when Bryson walked past in the background, a moment that went viral and sparked one of golf's most entertaining feuds. Rory McIlroy made subtle digs about Bryson's playing speed and style. Phil Mickelson, never one to hold back, made comments suggesting that Bryson's approach to the game was overthinking things and missing the soul of golf. And then there were the smaller incidents that accumulated over time. Bryson's tendency to blame everything except himself when things went wrong, complaining about bad breaks, course setups, equipment issues, even his caddy in ways that made him look petulant and immature. His public feud with Golf Channel analyst Brandel Chambly that made Bryson look thin-skinned and unable to handle criticism. His conflicts with cameramen and media members that created a reputation as someone difficult to work with and quick to anger when things didn't go his way. But through all of that drama, Bryson was still a PGA Tour member. He was still playing the same events, competing for the same trophies, and part of the same ecosystem. Other players might not have liked him personally, but there was at least a baseline level of professional respect and courtesy. They were all part of the same team, fighting for the same tour, and bound by the same code that kept tensions from boiling over completely. And then came June 2022, and everything changed forever. Bryson DeChambeau announced he was leaving the PGA Tour to join Live Eve Golf, the Saudi-backed upstart league that was tearing the sport apart. The reported contract was staggering, believed to be somewhere between $125 and $150 million guaranteed, paid entirely up front, regardless of performance or results. Bryson became one of LIV's marquee signings, a star they could point to as proof that the league could attract the world's best players away from the established tour. For PGA Tour players, Bryson's defection wasn't just another guy chasing money, it felt like a betrayal that cut deeper than most other Live departures. Because unlike players like Dustin Johnson or Phil Mickelson, who were older and arguably past their primes, Bryson was 28 years old, in the absolute peak of his career, and walking away from the tour that had made him a star and a millionaire. He'd won 8 PGA Tour events, including a major championship. He'd earned over $27 million in prize money on tour. He'd built his entire brand and reputation through PGA Tour success. And now he was taking all of that credibility, all of that star power, and handing it to a rival league that was actively trying to destroy the PGA Tour. But here's where things get even more complicated and where the real animosity started building. Bryson didn't just leave quietly and respectfully, he left while making comments that felt like direct shots at the PGA Tour and the players who stayed. In interviews after joining LIV, Bryson talked about how the PGA Tour schedule was too demanding, how the tour didn't treat players well enough, how offered better work-life balance and more respect for athletes. He framed his decision as standing up for player rights and pushing for change in professional golf, positioning himself as some kind of revolutionary rather than just another guy who took the biggest paycheck. Those comments landed like grenades in PGA Tour locker rooms. Players who had turned down massive LIV offers to stay loyal to the tour felt insulted and attacked. Rory McIlroy, who had become the de facto leader and spokesperson for PGA Tour loyalists, was particularly frustrated. He'd spent months defending the tour publicly, fighting against LIV's narrative, and dealing with the stress and pressure of being golf's moral compass during the sport's civil war. And here was Bryson, someone who'd benefited enormously from the PGA Tour system, now criticizing that same system from the comfort of his guaranteed $125 million contract. But the tension was still somewhat manageable at that point. Bryson was gone to LIV, PGA Tour players were annoyed and felt betrayed, but there was at least physical and competitive separation between the two groups. They weren't playing in the same events, weren't crossing paths in locker rooms, and could mostly avoid each other except for the 4 major championships where both PGA Tour and LIV players still competed. And then came 2024 and everything exploded in ways nobody predicted. Bryson DeChambeau won the US Open at Pinehurst No. 2 in one of the most dramatic and impressive performances of the entire year. He held off Rory McIlroy down the stretch, making crucial putts and recovering from difficult positions, while McIlroy melted down and missed short putts that would have given him his first major championship in a decade. It was Bryson's second US Open title, cementing his place among the game's elite players and proving that his move to LIV hadn't diminished his competitive edge or his ability to win on golf's biggest stages. For PGA Tour players, watching Bryson win that US Open was absolutely gut-wrenching, not just because he beat Rory McIlroy, the tour's biggest defender and most visible loyalist, but because it validated Bryson's decision to leave. It proved that you could take the Saudi money, play a lighter schedule with less pressure, and still show up and dominate at majors. It made every PGA Tour player who had turned down LIV offers wonder if they'd made the right choice. And it gave Bryson a platform to talk about his success and his happiness with LIV in ways that felt like twisting the knife even deeper. But winning the US Open wasn't what finally made PGA Tour players unable to stand Bryson anymore. That was just fuel on a fire that had been building for years. What really pushed things over the edge was what Bryson did in the weeks and months after that US Open victory. The way he handled his newfound platform and the decisions he made that felt like deliberate provocations to everyone still on the PGA Tour. First came the social media blitz. Bryson, who had always been active on social media but often in ways that created controversy and backlash, suddenly transformed into a content creation machine. He started posting constantly on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter, creating a carefully curated image of himself as golf's fun, relatable, everyday guy. Videos of him hitting trick shots, breaking down his US Open victory in dramatic detail, collaborating with influencers and celebrities who had nothing to do with professional golf, and most controversially, creating content that showcased the LIV golf lifestyle in ways that felt like advertisements and recruitment videos for the league. PGA Tour players watched all of this with growing frustration and disgust. Here was Bryson, making millions from Saudi money, turning himself into a social media influencer, and barely even pretending to care about competitive golf anymore. It felt like he was rubbing his LIV success in everyone's faces, flaunting the easy money and relaxed schedule while PGA Tour players were grinding week after week, trying to earn FedEx Cup points and maintain their tour cards. But that was just the beginning. What really ignited the firestorm was Bryson's decision to openly criticize the official World Golf Ranking System and the way it was being used to keep LIV players out of major championships. In multiple interviews and social media posts, Bryson argued that the OWGR was politically motivated, that it was being weaponized against LIV players unfairly, and that the major championships should change their qualification criteria to include more LIV players regardless of world ranking. On the surface, that might seem like reasonable advocacy for himself and his fellow LIV competitors. But to PGA Tour players, it felt like the ultimate hypocrisy. Bryson had voluntarily left the tour that awards OWGR points. He had chosen guaranteed money over the competitive structure that the entire sport is built on. And now he was complaining that he wasn't getting the same benefits and privileges that come with staying on the established tours. It was like quitting your job for a competitor and then demanding your old employer still give you health insurance and vacation days. Rory McIlroy, who had already been frustrated with Bryson for years, reportedly said in a private conversation that was later leaked that Bryson wants to have his cake and eat it too. He wants the guaranteed Live money without any of the consequences that come with leaving the tour. That sentiment echoed through every PGA Tour locker room. Players felt like Bryson was acting entitled, expecting special treatment, and unwilling to accept that his decision to join LIV came with real trade-offs and sacrifices. And then came the comments that really crossed the line for many players. In an interview with a golf podcast, Bryson suggested that PGA Tour players who stayed loyal to the tour were either scared of change or not smart enough to recognize a better opportunity when it was presented to them. He implied that staying on the PGA Tour was the safe, easy choice, while joining LIV required courage and vision. He positioned himself and other LIV players as pioneers and innovators, while subtly suggesting that PGA Tour players were clinging to an outdated system because they lacked the confidence to try something new. Those comments detonated like bombs across professional golf. Players who had turned down massive LIV offers specifically because they valued tradition, loyalty, and the competitive integrity of the PGA Tour felt personally attacked and insulted. Justin Thomas, Jordan Spieth, Scottie Scheffler, and dozens of other top players who could have taken huge LIV contracts but chose to stay were now being called scared and unimaginative by someone who had taken the money and was desperately trying to justify his decision. And the drama kept escalating. At the 2024 Open Championship, there were reports of a heated exchange between Bryson and several PGA Tour players in the locker room area. Details were kept private, but multiple sources confirmed that words were exchanged, accusations were thrown around, and the tension was so thick that security and tournament officials had to intervene to prevent things from getting physical. One insider described it as the closest professional golf has come to an actual fistfight between tour pros in modern history. Then came Bryson's decision to double down on his live commitment by becoming one of the league's most vocal ambassadors and defenders, while other Live players kept relatively quiet about the tour war and tried to focus on their own games. Bryson couldn't resist jumping into every controversy and debate. He defended LIV's business model publicly. He praised the Saudi Public Investment Fund for investing in golf. He argued that LIV was good for the sport and that critics were stuck in the past. Every statement felt like another middle finger to the PGA Tour, and everyone's still loyal to it. PGA Tour players started referring to Bryson in private conversations as LIV's puppet or Saudi spokesperson, mocking his transformation from someone who used to complain about everything on the PGA Tour to someone who now acted like LIV was perfect and could do no wrong. The perception was that Bryson had been bought, that his $125 million contract came with an obligation to be LIV's biggest cheerleader, and that he'd completely sold out any principles or authenticity he might have once had. And then came what many consider the final straw, the moment that turned frustration and annoyance into genuine hatred. In late 2024, rumors started circulating that Bryson was actively trying to recruit other PGA Tour players to join LIV, specifically targeting younger players and offering to help facilitate meetings with LIV officials and Saudi representatives. Several players confirmed they'd received messages from Bryson or people close to him pitching the benefits of LIV and trying to convince them to jump ship. For PGA Tour players, this crossed a line from personal decision to active sabotage. Bryson wasn't just living his own life and making his own choices anymore. He was actively working to weaken and damage the tour by trying to poach its players. He'd gone from defector to recruiter, from someone making a personal career decision to someone actively undermining the institution that had made his career possible. Rory McIlroy, in a rare moment of public frustration, made comments to the media suggesting that certain LIV players players were now working as salesmen for the Saudis, and that it was disappointing to see former colleagues turn into recruiters for a league that was trying to destroy everything they'd all built together. While Rory didn't name Bryson specifically, everyone knew exactly who he was talking about. The recruiting efforts also put younger players in incredibly uncomfortable positions. Imagine being a 24-year-old PGA Tour player trying to establish your career, and suddenly Bryson DeChambeau, a major champion and established star, is messaging you about how much better life is on Live, and how you're making a mistake by staying loyal to the tour. For players who looked up to Bryson or respected his accomplishments, it created a weird psychological pressure and made them feel like they were being manipulated by someone they used to admire. The situation reached peak absurdity at the 2025 Masters, where Bryson showed up wearing Live branded gear during practice rounds, gave interviews where he talked about how much he loved the Live experience, and generally acted like he was at Augusta to promote his league rather than compete in one of golf's 4 major championships. PGA Tour players who were at the Masters specifically to honor the tradition and compete for a green jacket felt like Bryson was disrespecting the tournament and using it as a platform for Live propaganda. One veteran player, speaking anonymously to a golf journalist, said that Bryson had become insufferable and that nobody wanted to be around him anymore because every interaction turned into a defense of Live or a criticism of the PGA Tour. Another player said that Bryson had burned so many bridges that even if the PGA Tour and LIV eventually merged and everyone ended up playing together again, Bryson would still be persona non grata in most locker rooms because of how he'd handled the entire situation. And here's what makes this whole situation so tragic and preventable. Bryson DeChambeau didn't have to become one of the most hated figures in professional golf. If he'd left for LIV quietly, focused on his game, avoided making inflammatory comments about the PGA Tour, and shown some humility and understanding about why his decision upset people, he could have maintained at least cordial relationships with his former colleagues. Players like Dustin Johnson, who also joined LIV, managed to avoid becoming pariahs by simply keeping their heads down and not making the tour war personal. But Bryson couldn't do that. Whether it's his personality, his need for attention, his genuine belief that he's right about everything, or pressure from LIV to be their most visible ambassador, he kept making choices that antagonized people and burned relationships that could never be repaired. And now he's in a position where he's rich, successful, and more famous than ever, but genuinely disliked by most of the people he used to share a locker room with. PGA Tour players can't stand Bryson DeChambeau anymore, and the truth is, he did it to himself. Every controversial comment, every Live defense, every recruiting effort, every social media post that felt like a middle finger to his former tour, it all added up to create a situation where Bryson is now one of the most disliked figures in professional golf. And the saddest part, it didn't have to be this way.